The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Millwood, Colorado, as Delia Reeves clutched the letter that had shattered her world. The year was 1878, and at 24 years old, she was now alone, a widow with nothing but a carpetbag of belongings and memories of a husband claimed by consumption 3 weeks prior. The stagecoach that had brought her to this mining town rumbled away, leaving her in a cloud of dust that settled on her black morning dress. Delia straightened her back and adjusted her small hat, anchored by a single pin. She had come to Millwood because it was the only place that offered promise. Her late husband's cousin supposedly lived here, though they had never met. It was her only connection to anyone in this vast, unforgiving territory. The town's main street stretched before her, a collection of wooden buildings, some with false fronts reaching optimistically toward the darkening sky. Men in worn clothing milled about, and a few women hurried to complete errands before nightfall. Delia took a deep breath and approached the first building with a sign indicating rooms for rent. "Excuse me," she said softly to the balding proprietor behind the counter. "I need a room for the night, possibly longer." The man looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her worn shoes and the modest carpetbag. "Payment up front, $1 per night." Delia reached into her small purse, heart sinking as she counted her meager funds. "I have 75 cents, sir." "I was hoping to find work tomorrow to no exceptions," he cut her off. "Come back when you have the full amount." Nodding stiffly, Delia stepped back outside, swallowing past the lump in her throat. The next boarding house yielded similar results, and the third was even less accommodating. "No room for widows," the stern-faced woman said, not even bothering to inquire about payment. "Brings bad luck." As darkness fell completely, Delia found herself standing outside the town's small church, hoping the minister might offer sanctuary. Her knock went unanswered, and when she tried the door, she found it locked. The saloon was lit up bright as day, piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the street. Delia knew better than to seek refuge there. With growing desperation, she knocked on the door of a modest home where lamplight glowed in the window. "What do you want?" A tired-looking woman peered out, a baby wailing somewhere behind her. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Delia said. "I've just arrived in town and have nowhere to stay tonight." "I wonder if I might. We've barely got room for our own," the woman interrupted. "Try the hotel." 4 more doors closed in her face before Delia found herself at the edge of town, exhausted and frightened. The night had grown cold, and she huddled against the wall of a storage shed, considering whether she might slip inside unnoticed. "Madam, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her. Delia turned to see a tall figure approaching on horseback. The man dismounted with fluid grace, his features becoming clearer as he stepped into the moonlight. He was perhaps 30, with a strong jawline partially concealed by a short beard. His eyes were kind but wary. "I'm fine, thank you," Delia said automatically, though her voice betrayed her. "You don't look fine," he replied simply. "You look like you've been turned away from every door in Millwood." The accuracy of his observation brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. "I've had some difficulty finding lodging," she admitted. The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Name's Vaughn Ashford. I've got a place about a mile outside town." He gestured toward the darkness beyond the last buildings. "It's not much, but my home is yours if you need it." Delia hesitated. Every sensible bone in her body told her to decline. Going with a strange man to an isolated location was beyond reckless. And yet, the alternative was a night spent in the cold, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the shadows. "I'm Delia Reeves," she said finally. "My husband died 3 weeks ago. I came here looking for his cousin, but I haven't had the chance to locate him yet. Vaughn nodded, not pressing for details. Mrs. Reeves, I can see you're weighing whether I'm more dangerous than spending the night out here. Fair enough. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a badge. I serve as deputy in these parts when Sheriff Miller needs help. Not a full-time position, but it might ease your mind. The silver star gleamed in the moonlight. Delia's shoulders relaxed slightly. I would be grateful for shelter tonight, she said. And I can cook breakfast as payment. Vaughn smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face. Deal, he said, then gestured to his horse. This is Merlin. He's strong enough to carry us both if you don't mind sharing the saddle. Within moments, Delia found herself seated behind Vaughn, her carpetbag tied to the saddle. She hesitantly placed her hands at his waist as the horse began to move. Hold tighter, he instructed. I won't break. The journey to Vaughn's homestead took longer than expected. By the time they arrived, Delia was nodding off against his back, startling awake when the horse stopped. Here we are, Vaughn said, dismounting and offering his hand to help her down. In the moonlight, she could make out the shape of a small cabin with a covered porch. A corral stood nearby, and the outline of what appeared to be a barn loomed in the background. I built it myself, he said, leading Merlin to the corral. Started 3 years ago, been adding to it when I can. Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove radiating lingering warmth. A door led to what Delia assumed was a bedroom. You can take the bed, Vaughn said, lighting a lamp. I'll make do out here. I couldn't possibly, Mrs. Reeves, he interrupted gently. You look ready to collapse where you stand. Take the bed. I've slept in worse places than my own floor. Too exhausted to argue further, Delia nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. I don't know what would have become of me tonight without your kindness. Vaughn, he corrected. And you're welcome. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. He pointed to a small table where a basin and pitcher sat. Delia entered the bedroom, setting down her carpetbag. The bed was neatly made with a colorful quilt. A small window let in moonlight, and a chest of drawers stood against one wall. It was sparse but clean. She splashed water on her face and hands, then unpinned her hat and loosened her hair from its tight bun. The relief was immediate, easing the headache that had been building. After removing her boots and outer dress, she slipped under the quilt in her chemise and petticoat. Despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come immediately. The day's events swirled in her mind, the rejection at every door in Millwood, the growing desperation, and then the unexpected kindness of a stranger. What would tomorrow bring? Would she find her husband's cousin? Would he even welcome her if she did? These questions followed Delia into troubled dreams of endless doors closing in her face. Morning came with the sound of movement in the main room. For a moment, Delia was disoriented, then memory returned. She dressed quickly, pinned her dark hair into a simple knot, and emerged from the bedroom. Vaughn stood at the stove, coffee brewing in a battered pot. He had already been outside, his hair was damp, and he wore a fresh shirt. Good morning, he said. Hope I didn't wake you. Not at all. Delia moved to the stove. I believe I promised breakfast as payment. Please let me. Vaughn stepped aside, watching as she assessed what was available: eggs, some bacon, flour for biscuits. She worked efficiently, and soon the small cabin was filled with enticing aromas. As they ate, Delia gathered her courage. Mr. Ashford, Vaughn, I appreciate your hospitality more than I can say, but I need to ask a favor. Do you know a man named Howard Reeves? He would be my husband's cousin. Vaughn's fork paused midway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. Howard Reeves, he repeated. Yes, I knew him. The past tense made Delia's heart sink. Knew, He died last winter. Pneumonia took him fast. I'm sorry. Delia stared at her plate, vision blurring. Her last connection, her only plan gone. I see, she managed. Did you have arrangements with him? Vaughn asked. No, nothing definite. I just hoped. She straightened her shoulders. Well then, I'll need to find work in town today. What kind of work were you thinking? I can sew, cook, clean. I taught school briefly before I married. She hesitated. I don't have many options, but I'm willing to work hard. Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. Millwood's not the friendliest place for a woman alone, he said. As you discovered last night. I noticed, Delia replied dryly, a flash of spirit showing through her composed exterior. The general store might need help, or maybe Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house, not the one that turned you away, the other end of town. Delia nodded. I'll try both. Would it be possible to get a ride back to town? Vaughn rose and began clearing the table. I'll do better than that. I'll introduce you around. True to his word, Vaughn rode with Delia back to Millwood after breakfast. The town looked different in daylight, busier, less threatening, though she noticed curious glances as they rode down the main street. Their first stop was the general store, a large establishment with goods stacked from floor to ceiling. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Percy Gardner, listened to Vaughn's introduction with visible skepticism. A widow, eh? He said, eyeing Delia. Where from? St. Louis originally, she answered. Most recently from Denver. Can you keep accounts? My wife used to do it, but her eyes are failing. I can, sir. My husband was a clerk. He taught me bookkeeping. Gardner nodded slowly. I can offer $2 a week, no room included. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was a start. When would you like me to begin? Tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. He turned back to arranging tobacco tins, conversation clearly over. Outside, Delia exhaled heavily. Well, that's something. Vaughn frowned. $2 is robbery for bookkeeping. It's what's offered, Delia said simply. Now for lodging. Mrs. Wilson's boarding house proved to be a neat, 2-story building with a small garden out front. The proprietress was a gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. $4 a week gets you a room and 2 meals a day, she said after Vaughn made introductions. Payment in advance, no exceptions, no male visitors upstairs, and no coming in after 9. Delia calculated quickly. I've secured work at the general store, but it won't cover the full amount just yet. Is there perhaps work I could do here to make up the difference? Mrs. Wilson's eyes narrowed. What can you do? I'm an excellent seamstress. I can also cook, clean, whatever you need. The older woman considered this. I've been looking for someone to help with the laundry and mending. It's back-breaking work. I'm not afraid of hard work, madam. $2 a week, plus helping with laundry on Mondays and Thursdays, and mending whenever needed. That gets you the room and meals. Relief washed over Delia. That would be wonderful, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Wilson said with a hint of amusement. Wait until you've handled washing day for 12 boarders. As they left the boarding house, Vaughn turned to Delia. That's settled then. You start at Gardner's tomorrow and move in here today. Delia nodded, surprised at the hollow feeling in her chest. She'd known Vaughn Ashford less than a day, yet the thought of parting ways left her unsettled. Yes, that seems best. I can't thank you enough for your help. No need for thanks. He hesitated, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Listen, I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps I could check on how you're settling in. Warmth spread through Delia's chest. I'd like that very much. Later that afternoon, Vaughn helped carry Delia's meager belongings to her room at the boarding house, a small space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook for clothes. The window overlooked the garden, at least providing some cheerful scenery. It's perfect, Delia said, though they both knew it was far from that. I should be going, Vaughn said, lingering in the doorway. "Good luck tomorrow at Gardner's." "Thank you for everything," Delia replied. "Truly." After he left, Delia sat on the bed, reality settling over her. She was alone in a strange town, with 2 jobs that would barely sustain her and no family to speak of. But she had a roof over her head and work for her hands. It would have to be enough. The next weeks fell into a grueling rhythm. Delia rose before dawn each day to help with breakfast at the boarding house before walking to the general store by 7. There, she spent hours reconciling accounts in a cramped back room, breathing dust from the ledgers and squinting in poor light. At 5, she returned to Mrs. Wilson's to help prepare dinner, then spent evenings mending clothes or linens. Mondays and Thursdays were devoted to laundry, great steaming tubs of water, harsh lye soap that cracked her skin, and endless wringing and hanging. By nightfall, she was too exhausted to think, falling into dreamless sleep until the cycle began again. But there were bright spots. Mrs. Wilson, beneath her gruff exterior, proved fair and occasionally even kind, slipping Delia extra portions at meals or a pot of salve for her chapped hands. And every Saturday, Vaughn appeared at the general store just as she was finishing her workday. Their conversations were brief at first, polite inquiries about her adjustment to town life, offers to carry packages, discussions of the weather. But as weeks passed, they began to share more. Vaughn told her about his life before Millwood, growing up in Pennsylvania, fighting in the war when barely 18, drifting westward afterward, unable to settle until finding this corner of Colorado. Delia shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her brief teaching career, and gradually, details about her marriage to Thomas, how they'd met at a church social, how his gentle nature and love of books had drawn her to him, how his health had begun failing within a year of their wedding, consumption slowly claiming him until nothing remained but a shell of the man she'd married. "I nursed him until the end," she told Vaughn one Saturday as they walked down Main Street. "The doctor bills took everything we had saved. When he died, I couldn't even afford to stay in our rooms." "You loved him very much," Vaughn observed quietly. "I did," Delia acknowledged. "But toward the end, love wasn't enough. There was just pain and worry and fear." She paused. "Is that terrible to admit?" "No," Vaughn said. "It's honest. And I imagine Thomas wouldn't want you to remember only the suffering." Delia glanced at him, struck by his perception. "No, he wouldn't." As autumn approached, bringing cooler nights and changing leaves to the cottonwoods along the creek, Delia realized her feelings for Vaughn had deepened beyond gratitude or friendship. She found herself watching for him from the store window on Saturdays, her heart quickening at the sight of him riding into town. She took more care with her appearance on those days, though her options were limited to the 3 dresses she owned. One particular Saturday in late September, Vaughn arrived with an unusual request. "There's a harvest dance next weekend at the Thompsons' barn," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wondered if you might want to go with me." Delia's pulse jumped. "A dance? Nothing fancy. Just neighbors getting together before winter sets in. There'll be food, music." "I don't have anything suitable to wear," she said automatically, then regretted the words. It wasn't a refusal, but it sounded like one. "Oh," Vaughn's face fell slightly. "Of course, I understand. But I'd love to go," Delia added quickly. "Perhaps I can alter one of my dresses." The smile that spread across his face was worth any amount of late-night sewing. That evening, Delia examined her 3 dresses with a critical eye. The black morning dress was out of the question for a festive occasion. Her blue work dress was too plain and showed signs of wear. That left her dark green dress, worn for church on Sundays. With some adjustments, new lace at the collar perhaps, and the hem let down, it might serve. She mentioned her project to Mrs. Wilson the next day, who surprised her by producing a box from the attic. "These belong to my daughter," the older woman explained. "She married a man from Denver 5 years ago, left these behind, saying they were too country for city living." Inside were several dresses, slightly outdated but made of good quality fabric. One in particular caught Delia's eye, a russet brown that would complement her auburn hair and hazel eyes. "I couldn't possibly," Delia began. "Take it," Mrs. Wilson insisted. "It's just gathering dust here and Sarah won't miss it. You're about her size, though you might need to take it in a bit. She was always fond of desserts." With tears in her eyes, Delia accepted the gift. That night and each night following, she worked on the dress after finishing her other chores, altering the bodice, adding subtle details with her skilled needle. By the night before the dance, it was transformed not into the latest fashion from back east, but into something that made her feel, for the first time in over a year, like a woman rather than just a widow. Saturday dawned clear and crisp. Delia went through her workday in a state of nervous anticipation. At the store, even Mr. Gardner noticed her distraction. "Got ants in your breeches, Mrs. Reeves?" he asked when she miscounted a customer's change. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, correcting the error. "It won't happen again." When closing time finally came, Delia hurried back to the boarding house to prepare. She washed with special care, using a precious bit of lilac-scented soap she'd been saving. She arranged her hair in a more becoming style than her usual severe knot, allowing soft tendrils to frame her face. Putting on the altered dress was like stepping into a new version of herself. The russet color warmed her complexion, and the modifications she'd made emphasized her narrow waist while maintaining propriety. A touch of rose water at her wrists and throat was her only adornment. When she descended the stairs, Mrs. Wilson was in the front parlor and stopped short at the sight of her. "Well," the older woman said, "Sarah never looked half so good in that dress." Vaughn arrived promptly at 6, driving a wagon rather than riding Merlin. He wore clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest she hadn't seen before. His hair was neatly trimmed, his beard groomed. The sight of him made her breath catch. His reaction to her was equally affected. He stood in the parlor, hat in hand, momentarily speechless. "You look beautiful," he finally said. "Thank you," Delia replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Wilson watched this exchange with thinly veiled amusement. "Have her back by 11, deputy," she said. "Rules are rules, even for dance nights." The Thompson farm was about 3 miles outside of town. As they drove, Delia found herself increasingly aware of Vaughn beside her, the clean scent of him, the way his hands handled the reins with confidence, the occasional brush of his arm against hers when the wagon hit a rut in the road. "I should warn you," he said as they approached the farm, "people will talk." "About what? Us together. Small towns run on gossip." Delia considered this. "Does that bother you?" Vaughn glanced at her, expression serious. "Not if it doesn't bother you," she shook her head. "I've endured worse than gossip." The Thompson barn had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space cleared for dancing. Hay bales served as seating around the perimeter. At one end, tables sagged under the weight of food brought by attendees: fried chicken, ham, potatoes, pies of every description. Music came from a small group of local men with fiddles, a banjo, and a harmonica. They played lively tunes that had several couples already dancing when Delia and Vaughn arrived. "Vaughn Ashford, as I live and breathe." A broad-shouldered farmer approached, slapping Vaughn on the back. "Didn't think we'd see you here. You usually avoid these gatherings like the plague." "Evening, Jim," Vaughn replied good-naturedly. Mrs. Delia Reeves, this is Jim Thompson, our host. Jim, Mrs. Reeves recently moved to Millwood. Jim's eyes twinkled with undisguised curiosity as he shook Delia's hand. Welcome, madam. Any friend of Vaughn's is a friend of ours. Help yourselves to food and drink. Martha's Punch is famous for miles around and infamous for those who don't know its strength. As Jim moved off to greet other arrivals, more introductions followed. Delia met so many people in quick succession that the names began to blur together. She noticed the curious glances, the whispered conversations behind hands, but found she didn't mind. It felt good to be somewhere other than the store or boarding house, to be part of a community gathering. Would you like to dance? Vaughn asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. Delia hesitated. It's been a long time. For me too, he admitted. We can stumble through it together. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he led her onto the floor. They were stiff at first, careful of space between them, but as the music continued, they found their rhythm. Vaughn proved to be a better dancer than he'd implied, guiding her confidently through the turns. Where did you learn to waltz? Delia asked, surprised. A shadow crossed his face. My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was the mark of a gentleman. She was right, Delia said softly. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, ate from the bountiful tables, and talked with the other attendees. Delia found the community more welcoming than her initial experience in Millwood had suggested. Perhaps it was Vaughn's presence beside her, or perhaps people simply needed time to accept newcomers. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for fresh air. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the black velvet sky. Their breath created small clouds in the chilly air. Are you cold? Vaughn asked, noticing Delia's slight shiver. A little, she admitted. He removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The weight of it was comforting, carrying his warmth and scent. Thank you for inviting me tonight, Delia said. I didn't realize how much I missed this. Being around people, laughing, dancing. Vaughn leaned against the fence, studying her in the moonlight. You've come alive tonight. It suits you. The simple observation touched her deeply. I think I forgot how to be anything other than a grieving widow or a worker. It becomes a habit, doesn't it? Just surviving. Yes, he agreed. I know something about that. They stood in companionable silence, listening to the music drifting from the barn. When Vaughn spoke again, his voice was hesitant. Delia, I've been meaning to ask you something. Her heart skipped. Yes. Before he could continue, they were interrupted by a young boy running up to them. Deputy Ashford, Pa sent me to find you. There's trouble in town. Men from the mining camp started a fight at Dugan's saloon. Vaughn straightened immediately. Anyone hurt? Don't know, sir. Pa just said to fetch you quick. Vaughn turned to Delia, regret clear on his face. I have to go. Of course, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. Your duty comes first. I'll find someone to drive you back to town, he said, already scanning the gathering. No need. The Wilsons are here. I saw them earlier. I can ride back with them. Vaughn hesitated, clearly torn. I'm sorry about this. Don't be, Delia assured him, slipping his coat from her shoulders and returning it to him. Go, I'll be fine. After a brief word with Jim Thompson to ensure Delia would have a ride home, Vaughn hurried to his wagon. Delia watched him go, the night suddenly colder without his presence. Mrs. Wilson found her still standing there moments later. Everything all right, dear? I saw the deputy leaving in quite a hurry. There's trouble in town, Delia explained. He had to go. The older woman nodded knowingly. That's the life with a lawman. Never know when duty will call them away. The observation gave Delia pause. She hadn't considered what it would mean to care for someone in Vaughn's position, the worry, the uncertainty. Was she ready for that, after the long illness that had claimed Thomas? The ride back to town with the Wilsons was subdued compared to the journey out with Vaughn. Delia found herself watching anxiously as they approached Millwood, relieved to see no obvious signs of ongoing disturbance. "Looks like whatever happened is over," Mr. Wilson observed as they passed the saloon, which was dark and quiet. "Thank goodness," his wife replied. "I'll never understand why men need to solve disagreements with their fists." Back at the boarding house, Delia thanked the Wilsons for the ride and went upstairs to her room. Though exhausted, sleep eluded her. She kept thinking about Vaughn, the unasked question, the way he'd looked at her under the stars, the feel of his hand at her waist during the waltz. Sunday morning found her in church, her usual place in the back pew, though her mind wandered during Reverend Clark's sermon on patience. She scanned the congregation several times but saw no sign of Vaughn. After the service, she was surprised when the Reverend approached her. "Mrs. Reeves, a moment if you please." "Of course, Reverend." The thin, scholarly man looked uncomfortable. "I understand you work for both Mr. Gardner and Mrs. Wilson." "Yes, that's right." "And that you attended the harvest dance with Deputy Ashford last night." Delia stiffened. "Is there a point to these questions, Reverend?" He cleared his throat. "Simply that appearances are important in a small town. A widow so recently bereaved should perhaps be more circumspect in her associations." Hot indignation flared in Delia's chest. "My husband has been dead for 4 months, Reverend, not 4 days. And my association with Deputy Ashford is entirely proper. He has been nothing but respectful and kind." "I meant no offense," the Reverend backtracked. "But there has been talk." "There is always talk," Delia cut in, surprising herself with her boldness. "I would hope a man of God would be more concerned with truth than gossip." She left him standing there, cheeks burning with both anger and embarrassment. Outside the church, she took several deep breaths of the cool autumn air, trying to calm herself. "Everything all right, Mrs. Reeves?" She turned to find Sheriff Miller watching her with concern. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, he had been polite but distant the few times they'd previously met. "Yes, thank you, Sheriff. Just a difference of opinion with Reverend Clark." The sheriff chuckled. "The Reverend means well but sometimes forgets that his flock consists of people, not just souls to save." He fell into step beside her. "I wanted to thank you, by the way." "Thank me? For what?" "For getting Vaughn to that dance last night. Been trying for years to drag him to social gatherings. The man works too hard, keeps too much to himself." Delia wasn't sure how to respond. "He was kind enough to invite me." Hum, the sheriff murmured knowingly. "Well, he's fine, in case you were wondering. Got a bit banged up breaking up that fight, but nothing serious. Sent him home to rest after we locked up the troublemakers." Relief washed over her. "I'm glad to hear it." "He's a good man, Vaughn is," Sheriff Miller continued. "Best deputy I've had. Too good for it, really. He should have his own badge by now, but he seems content with his ranch and occasional lawman duties." They had reached the boarding house. Delia paused at the gate. "Thank you for walking with me, Sheriff." "My pleasure, Mrs. Reeves. Oh, and one more thing." His eyes twinkled. "Don't let Clark or anyone else tell you when it's proper to start living again. Life's too short and too precious for that nonsense." With a tip of his hat, he continued down the street, leaving Delia thoughtful. Monday brought the usual laundry day drudgery, made worse by rain that forced them to string lines in the basement. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in the normal routine of work and chores. By Thursday, Delia had begun to wonder if Vaughn was deliberately avoiding her after the dance. She was elbow-deep in another load of laundry that afternoon when Mrs. Wilson appeared in the doorway. "You have a visitor," she announced, trying to sound severe but failing to hide her interest. Delia looked up. pushing damp hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "A visitor." "Deputy Ashford. He's waiting in the parlor." Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice. "I'd change that apron if I were you." Heart suddenly racing, Delia dried her hands and removed the wet apron. She smoothed her hair and straightened her dress as best she could before going to the parlor. Vaughn stood by the window, hat in hand. He turned when she entered, and she noticed immediately the fading bruise on his cheekbone. "Are you all right?" she asked without preamble. "I've had worse," he replied, touching the mark self-consciously. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Had to stay in town until the judge came through to deal with those minors. Sheriff Miller told me you weren't badly hurt." Vaughn smiled slightly. "Miller talks too much." An awkward silence fell between them. Delia was acutely aware of her work dress, her hands reddened from hot water and soap, her hair escaping its pins. "I wanted to apologize for leaving so abruptly Saturday night," Vaughn finally said. "There's no need. You were doing your duty." He nodded, then seemed to steel himself. "The thing is, I had planned to ask you something important, and I've been kicking myself for missing the chance." Delia's pulse quickened again. "What did you want to ask?" "I've been thinking," he began, then paused, visibly gathering courage. "My place needs a woman's touch. It's too big for one person." This was not what Delia had expected. "Are you offering me a housekeeping position?" she asked, confused. "What? No." Vaughn looked horrified. "I'm making a mess of this." He took a deep breath. "Delia, I care for you, more than I expected to care for anyone again. I know it hasn't been long since you lost Thomas, and maybe this is too soon, but I wanted to ask if you might consider a courtship with me." The directness of his proposal took her breath away. "A courtship," she repeated softly. "You don't have to answer right away," he added quickly. "I know it's sudden, and I'm not much of a catch, a part-time deputy with a small ranch that barely turns a profit, but I promise I'd do right by you." Delia found herself unexpectedly moved by his honesty. There was no artifice to Vaughn Ashford, no smooth words or practiced charm. Just a good man, offering his heart with all its imperfections. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like that very much." The hope that dawned on his face was like sunrise. "You would?" "Yes," she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Though I should warn you, Reverend Clark already thinks my behavior with you has been scandalous." Vaughn's expression darkened. "Clark should mind his own business." "That's essentially what I told him," Delia admitted. Surprise, then admiration crossed Vaughn's face. "I'd have liked to see that." Their courtship began slowly, respectful of both Delia's recent widowhood and the watchful eyes of Millwood. Vaughn called at the boarding house on Wednesday evenings and after church on Sundays, sometimes taking her for drives in his wagon, other times simply sitting with her in Mrs. Wilson's parlor. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their disappointments. Vaughn told her about fighting at Gettysburg when just a boy, about losing his older brother in the same battle, about drifting westward afterward, unable to go home to the family farm where memories lurked around every corner. Delia shared more about her marriage to Thomas, the joy of their early days, the gradual decline of his health, the grueling months of nursing him. She spoke of guilt, too guilt for sometimes resenting the burden, guilt for feeling relief when it was over, guilt for being alive when he was not. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Vaughn told her one evening as they walked along the creek near town. "You gave him everything you could." "Not everything," Delia said softly. "Toward the end, I held back parts of myself. It was the only way I could bear it, to separate myself somehow." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a failure, Delia. It's survival." As autumn deepened toward winter, Delia found herself falling in love with Vaughn, not the desperate, consuming passion of youth, but something steadier and deeper. She loved his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentleness that belied his capable exterior. In mid-November, as the first snow dusted the mountains visible from town, Vaughn took her to his ranch for the first time since that initial night. The small cabin had been meticulously cleaned, she noticed, and a new curtain hung at the window. "I thought you might like to see what I've done with the place," he said, slightly self-conscious as he showed her the improvements: a larger corral, a chicken coop with half a dozen hens, a vegetable garden now dormant for winter. "It's wonderful," Delia said sincerely. "You've created something real here, something lasting." Inside, over coffee at his small table, Vaughn reached for her hand. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "Our future, if you're willing." Delia's heart stuttered. "What about it?" "I know it's only been a few months," he continued, "and if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Delia. I want to marry you if you'll have me." Though she had begun to hope for this, hearing the words aloud still overwhelmed her. "Vaughn, I can add on to the cabin," he rushed on, as if afraid she might refuse. "Another room, a bigger kitchen, whatever you need to be comfortable. And I know it's a distance from town, but we could get a better wagon, make the journey easier when you want to visit friends or go to church." Delia squeezed his hand, stopping the flow of words. "Vaughn," she said again, this time with a smile that came from deep within her. "Yes." His face lit up with such joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I love you too." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. They decided on a Christmas wedding, small and simple, with just the community they had come to know in Millwood. Mrs. Wilson insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house, and Mr. Gardner, to everyone's surprise, offered Delia a small bonus as a wedding present when she gave notice at the store. On December 24, 1878, Delia stood in her room at the boarding house, wearing a new dress of deep blue wool that she had made herself. Her hair was arranged in soft waves, adorned with small white flowers from Mrs. Wilson's hothouse. She carried a bouquet of evergreen sprigs and dried berries. Mrs. Wilson bustled in, checking Delia's appearance with a critical eye. "You'll do," she said finally, but her voice was suspiciously thick. "Vaughn won't know what hit him." "I'm nervous," Delia admitted. "Of course you are. Marriage is a big step." The older woman adjusted a flower in Delia's hair. "But you've chosen well this time." "This time?" Mrs. Wilson patted her cheek. "My dear, I've heard enough about your first husband to know that while you loved him, he wasn't your equal in strength. Vaughn is. He'll be a true partner, not another person for you to care for." The observation was startlingly accurate. Thomas, for all his good qualities, had been dependent on her even before his illness. Vaughn was different, self-sufficient, capable, yet tender. The church was decorated with pine boughs and candles for the Christmas Eve service that would follow the wedding. As Delia walked down the aisle alone, there was no one to give her away. She saw only Vaughn waiting for her, his expression one of wonder and love. Reverend Clark, who had gradually warmed to their relationship, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. When Vaughn placed the simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all his days, Delia felt the last shadows of grief lift from her heart. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Vaughn's kiss was gentle but full of promise, drawing a few good-natured cheers from the congregation. As they turned to face their friends, Delia saw more than one person wiping away tears. The reception at the boarding house was a joyful affair, with food contributed by half the women in town and music provided by the same men who had played at the harvest dance. even Mr. Gardner unbent enough to offer a toast to the couple's happiness. Late in the evening, as snow began to fall outside the windows, Vaughn took Delia's hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ashford?" The new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said simply. They rode to the ranch in his wagon, wrapped in blankets against the cold, snowflakes swirling around them like stars fallen to earth. The cabin windows glowed with welcoming light. Vaughn had arranged for a neighbor to build up the fire before their arrival. Inside, Delia found the space transformed. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and a small Christmas tree stood in one corner, decorated with paper stars and strings of dried berries. "When did you do all this?" she asked, amazed. "Had some help," Vaughn admitted. "The Thompsons' daughters made the decorations. Do you like it?" "It's perfect," Delia said, tears welling in her eyes. "It's home." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Vaughn's arms around her, Delia marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow turned away from every door in Millwood to beloved wife, from grief to joy, from loneliness to belonging. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn murmured against her hair. "About that first night," she answered, "when you found me hiding behind that shed with nowhere to go." His arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I rode into town that night, as do I." She turned in his embrace to face him. "You said my home is yours. You remember." "I remember every moment with you," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I had no idea then how true those words would become. Spring brought new beginnings to the Ashford ranch. Delia had planted a garden larger than Vaughn's previous efforts, adding flowers among the vegetables. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a milk cow, a wedding gift from Sheriff Miller, grazed in the pasture. Inside, the cabin had been transformed by Delia's touch: curtains at the windows, colorful rag rugs on the floors, shelves that Vaughn had built filled with books they both enjoyed. Vaughn had kept his promise to expand the cabin, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. He worked on the additions in every spare moment, determined to complete them before summer's heat made the work unbearable. One warm May afternoon, as Delia kneaded bread dough at the table, she watched her husband through the open door. He was shirtless in the heat, muscles flexing as he sawed boards for the new porch he'd planned. 4 months of marriage had only deepened her love for him, his steadiness, his integrity, his tenderness with her. She wiped flour from her hands and went to the door. "Come have some water," she called. "You've been at it for hours." Vaughn set down his saw and came to her, accepting the dipper of cool water she offered from the bucket. "Thank you," he said, drinking deeply. "Bread smells good. It should be ready by supper." Delia hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous pastime," he teased, setting the dipper aside. "I'm serious, Vaughn." She took a deep breath. "I think we should consider a bigger bedroom." He looked puzzled. "Bigger. The one we have is plenty large enough for the two of us." "Yes, but—" Delia placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months there will be 3 of us." Vaughn stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "Are you saying—" "I'm with child," she confirmed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Parker confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." For a moment, Vaughn seemed frozen. Then he let out a whoop that surely could be heard all the way to Millwood, swept Delia into his arms and spun her around. "Careful," she laughed. "I'm in a delicate condition, or so the doctor tells me." Vaughn set her down immediately, his face a mixture of elation and concern. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to rest? Should I get anything from town?" Delia cupped his cheek, touched by his reaction. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," he said, covering her hand with his. "Not our baby. The wonder in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "No," she agreed softly, "not our baby." As her pregnancy progressed, Delia found herself surrounded by support. Mrs. Wilson sent over a trunk of baby clothes saved from her own children and grandchildren. The women of the church organized a quilting bee to create a special blanket for the new arrival. Sheriff Miller, who had become something of a surrogate father to them both, brought a beautiful cradle he'd commissioned from a carpenter in Denver. Even Mr. Gardner, unbent enough to offer congratulations and a small silver rattle when Delia stopped by the store during a trip to town. Vaughn was both protective and practical. He completed the cabin expansion with renewed vigor, creating a nursery adjoining their bedroom. He built a rocking chair for Delia, spending evenings smoothing and polishing the wood until it gleamed. When autumn came, he laid in extra supplies, concerned about winter weather isolating them from town when her time came. "You're fussing," Delia told him one October evening as he checked the pantry stores for the third time that week. "I'm preparing," he corrected. "There's a difference." She wrapped her arms around him from behind, her swollen belly pressing against his back. "The baby isn't due until December. We have time." Vaughn turned in her embrace, placing his hands on either side of her rounded stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A wife, a child on the way, a real home. Sometimes I wake up afraid it's all been a dream." "Not a dream," Delia assured him, placing her hands over his. "Though I understand the feeling. After Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy again." As if in agreement, the baby kicked against their joined hands. Vaughn's face lit with wonder as it did every time he felt the movement of their child. "Strong," he murmured. "Like his mother, or her father," Delia countered, smiling. The baby came in the midst of a December snowstorm, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Vaughn had gone to check on the livestock in the barn when Delia felt the first sharp pain. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, her water had broken. "The baby's coming," she said, gripping the edge of the table as another contraction seized her. Vaughn's face paled. "Now, but Dr. Parker won't be able to get here in this storm," Delia finished for him. "It's just us, Vaughn." For a moment, panic flashed in his eyes. Then his expression steadied. "Tell me what to do." The next hours were a blur of pain and determination for Delia. Vaughn proved remarkably calm, following her instructions, supporting her through each contraction, whispering encouragement when her strength flagged. "You can do this," he told her as the labor intensified. "You're the strongest person I know." Just after midnight, with a final push and a cry that seemed torn from her soul, Delia brought their son into the world. Vaughn caught the slippery, squalling infant in hands that trembled only slightly. "A boy," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." Following Delia's directions, he cleaned the baby, wrapped him in the special quilt made by the church women, and placed him in his mother's arms. "He's perfect," Delia whispered, counting tiny fingers, marveling at the dusting of dark hair, the miniature features that somehow combined her and Vaughn into something entirely new. "What shall we name him?" Vaughn asked, sitting beside them on the bed, one arm around Delia, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any. Now, looking at the tiny face, Delia knew. "Samuel," she said. "It means God has heard." "Because he heard both our prayers for a new beginning." "Samuel Ashford," Vaughn repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white, the small family huddled together in the warmth of their home, beginning a new chapter in a story that had started with a simple act of kindness on a desperate night. Spring 1880 found the Ashford Ranch thriving. Vaughn had added more cattle to his small herd, planted additional crops, and built a larger chicken coop to accommodate their growing flock. The cabin, once a bachelor's sparse shelter, now truly felt like a home, filled with the sounds and evidence of family life. Samuel, now 15 months old, toddled about on sturdy legs, curious about everything, his dark hair and hazel eyes a perfect blend of his parents'. He was a happy child, quick to smile, already showing signs of his father's quiet determination and his mother's compassionate nature. On a warm April morning, Delia sat on the newly expanded porch, shelling peas while watching Samuel play in the yard. Vaughn had ridden to Millwood for supplies and to check in with Sheriff Miller, who still called on him occasionally for deputy duties. As she worked, Delia reflected on how much had changed in the 2 years since she'd arrived in Colorado. The desperate widow with nowhere to turn had become a wife, mother, and respected member of the community. The grief that had once consumed her had transformed into a gentle remembrance of Thomas, a chapter in her life rather than its defining feature. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Vaughn returning, but he wasn't alone. Another rider accompanied him, a woman on a dappled mare. Delia stood, brushing her apron, curiosity piqued. Visitors to the ranch were rare, especially female ones. As they drew closer, Delia could see that the woman was young, perhaps 20, with blonde hair escaping from a practical bun. She wore a travel-stained dress and looked exhausted. Vaughn dismounted first, coming to lift Samuel, who had toddled toward him with outstretched arms. "Delia," he called, "we have a visitor." The young woman dismounted awkwardly, clearly unaccustomed to riding. Up close, Delia could see the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her posture. "This is Miss Alice Graham," Vaughn introduced her. "Miss Graham, my wife Delia. Pleased to meet you," Delia said, extending her hand. "Welcome to our home." The young woman hesitated before taking the offered hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your husband has been very kind." "Miss Graham arrived on today's stage," Vaughn explained. "She's looking for work in the area." "I was turned away from the boarding house," Alice added, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Wilson said she has no vacancies. And the hotel." She trailed off, but Delia could imagine what reception a young, unaccompanied woman might have received there. "I found her sitting outside the general store," Vaughn continued. "She hadn't eaten since yesterday." Understanding dawned on Delia immediately. Vaughn had seen in Alice a reflection of her own situation 2 years ago alone, without resources, doors closing at every turn. "You must be hungry," Delia said warmly. "Come inside. We have plenty." Over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and leftover stew, Alice's story emerged in hesitant fragments. She had come from Ohio, fleeing a situation she alluded to but didn't explicitly describe. She had teaching experience and had hoped to find work in that capacity, but the Millwood school already had a teacher. "I have references," she said earnestly, reaching for a worn envelope in her pocket. "I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, so anything, really. Do you like children?" Delia asked, watching as Samuel played with his wooden blocks on the floor nearby. Alice's face softened. "Very much. I have had younger siblings I helped raise." Delia and Vaughn exchanged a look, a silent communication born of their deep connection. "Miss Graham," Vaughn said, "my wife and I have been discussing finding someone to help around the ranch. Delia has more work than she can manage with Samuel demanding attention, and I could use help with the accounts and correspondence." Hope flickered in Alice's tired eyes. "Are you offering me a position, room, board, and a small wage to start?" Delia confirmed. "If it works out for all of us, we can discuss more permanent arrangements." But where would I stay? Alice looked around the cabin, which though expanded was still modest. We've been meaning to fix up the old bunkhouse, Vaughn said. It's small but sound. With a bit of work it could be comfortable quarters for you. Why? Alice asked suddenly. Why would you do this for a stranger? Delia smiled, reaching for Vaughn's hand across the table. Because 2 years ago I was in your position. Every door in Millwood closed to me, nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And then a kind man said, "My home is yours. We're simply passing on what was given to us." Tears filled Alice's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, Delia replied simply. At least until you find your feet. Alice did stay, proving herself a capable and willing worker. The small bunkhouse was transformed into cozy quarters with Delia's help, and Alice quickly became indispensable tending the garden, helping with Samuel, keeping the account books in meticulous order. More importantly, she became a friend to Delia, filling a need for female companionship that had been largely unmet since her arrival in Millwood. They worked together, shared stories, and sometimes simply sat in companionable silence, each understanding the other's journey from darkness to light. As summer approached, Alice received a letter that left her pale and shaking. She confided in Delia that it was from her brother, warning that the man she had fled, a powerful local politician who had pursued her relentlessly, despite her rejections, had discovered her general location and was making inquiries in Colorado. I should leave, Alice said, voice trembling. I don't want to bring trouble to your door after all your kindness. Nonsense, Vaughn declared when informed of the situation. You're under our protection now. Let him come. He'll find more than he bargained for in Millwood. True to his word, Vaughn rode to town the next day and returned with Sheriff Miller, who took down all the details of Alice's situation. The sheriff promised to keep an eye out for strangers asking questions and to spread word to neighboring towns to do the same. No one's going to harm you while you're with us, Delia assured Alice that night. Vaughn and Sheriff Miller won't allow it, and neither will I. As Alice became more integrated into their household, Delia found herself watching the growing friendship between the young woman and Sheriff Miller with interest. The widowed lawman, still handsome at 50, found increasingly frequent reasons to ride out to the Ashford ranch, and Alice's cheeks inevitably colored when he was present. History repeating itself, Delia commented to Vaughn one evening after the sheriff had stayed for dinner. What do you mean? Vaughn asked, stoking the fire for the night. A lost soul finds sanctuary, then love, Delia explained. Though I think Alice will be finding hers with the sheriff rather than her initial rescuer. Vaughn glanced toward the window, through which they could see the sheriff helping Alice draw water from the well. Miller's a good man. He'd take care of her. Yes, he would. Delia wrapped her arms around her husband's waist from behind, just as you've taken care of me. Vaughn turned in her embrace. You don't need taking care of, Delia. Never did. You're the strongest person I know. She reached up to touch his face, still marveling at how this man could see her so clearly. Everyone needs someone sometimes. I was fortunate enough to find you when I needed you most. He kissed her then, a kiss full of the love and respect that had grown between them over the past 2 years. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his crib nearby, Vaughn traced patterns on Delia's arm. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about family. What about it? I never had much growing up. Just my parents and brothers, and then just my mother after the war. He paused. But what we've created here, you, me, Samuel, even Alice in her way, it's more than I ever dreamed of having. Delia smiled in the darkness. It's about to get even bigger, she said softly. Vaughn's hand stilled on her arm. "What do you mean?" Taking his hand, Delia guided it to her stomach. "Dr. Parker confirmed it yesterday. Another baby due in winter." The joy that radiated from Vaughn was palpable even in the dark room. "Another child," he whispered reverently. "Our family grows." "Our family," Delia echoed, nestling closer to him. "From two lost souls to this. Who would have imagined?" As she drifted toward sleep, Delia thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the desperation, the closed doors, and finally the open heart of a man who had offered her not just shelter but a future. Out of the darkness had come light. Out of loss had come love. Out of endings had come the most beautiful beginning. And as the night wrapped around the small ranch house, where a family born of kindness and courage slept peacefully, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter over this corner of the Colorado wilderness, a beacon for other lost souls who might, someday, find their way home.